everybody, and welcome. My name is Laura Kikuchi, and I am one of the program directors for Riley's Way Foundation. We are a nonprofit that works to empower young leaders to become change agents in their community using our values of kindness, leadership, connection making, and empathy. I'm really excited today to launch our Kind Leadership Series, our virtual online space for teens to learn from experts and teens in the field to really make powerful, positive change in their communities. And I'm so excited today to be partnering with the Citizens Committee for Children of New York. We have Laura Jangstrom, the Director of Civic Engagement, along with Isatu, who is one of the peer trainers. And they're going to be walking you through the Mapping Community Needs and Assets workshop to really get to understand what needs your community has, how you can think through them, identify them, and then some really nifty online tools that you can use to figure out the different data and statistics. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hi, good afternoon. We are here today to present a training on how to map community needs and assets. Community mapping is a great tool to use for identifying issues that you would like to work on in order to improve your community. Our goals and objectives for this workshop are as follows. Participants will reflect upon their lived experience within their neighborhoods and create community mind maps to illustrate their thoughts, feelings, and attitudes about that community. Learn about various online data mapping tools that they may use for community research and develop an understanding of how to use the lived experience of community residents plus data to assist community needs. Today, we are going to be talking about the communities in which you live. As student leaders, it's important to have a good idea both of what your community's challenges are and also what assets or strength it already has. In order to do this, we are going to use two approaches. The first is to spend some time thinking about your own perceptions of your neighborhood. Since you are a resident, you can tell us as well as anyone what it's like to live there. Your lived experience is just as important as any statistic we can look at. The second is to look at the data available on your community. We will show you a few online databases you can use to see how people in your community or town are doing, statistically speaking, compared to people from other places. Between the map of your community that you create from your own experiences and the map you explore online, you should come away from this workshop with a little better of an understanding of what issues your community faces and what they may need in terms of resources. To start off, you are going to want to create a community mind map. To do this, you will need a piece of paper and something to draw with. A mind map is just a fancy way of saying that you will be drawing a picture of your community based on how you see it in your mind. It does not have to be a literal map of streets and buildings, though it certainly can include them. Rather, it should be a drawing that reflects what stands out to you about your community. It should depict not only the physical space, but how you interact with it and feel in the space. It is a visual way to identify thoughts, feelings, concepts, and other things besides geography. There is no wrong way to do this. Before you begin mapping, we want to put you in the right frame of mind by getting you really focused on visualizing your community and what it feels like when you are in different spaces within it. In order to do this, I'm going to read a series of questions to help you imagine your community. First question, when you think of your community, what words do you think of? When you think of the community, you may think of things like your family, the places you go in your community, and the things that are special to you. What are they? What is your street corner like? Your neighbors? Are there schools, community centers, or religious organizations that are especially well known in your community? Is there a place where everyone hangs out? Do you hang out in your neighborhood? Why or why not? Are there big grocery stores or shopping centers, places to get fresh fruits and vegetables? Is there a lot of crime? If so, what kind of crime? Where does crime happen? Are the streets clean? Are there parks to play in? Do you think children have enough safe places to go in your community? What sounds do you hear in your neighborhood? What feelings do you associate with being in your community? Do you feel a strong connection? What does that connection mean to you? What is the best thing about your community? What is the worst thing? What is your place in your community? What roles do you play? If you could improve your community, how would you do it? Okay, the visualization experience is complete. Now it's time for you to create your own community mind map. Please take 5 minutes to do so now. Remember, it doesn't have to be pretty or all encompassing, just what is most important for you to get across. Now we just have a couple of debrief questions.
I think these are things that you can think about after you do your community mind map. If you're doing this with a group or with somebody else, you can compare what you've drawn to get a sense of whether your experience of your community is different than another person's experience. If you're trying to get more community input than just a couple of people, you might consider doing this as an activity at a community forum, or even scheduling a focus group yourself and doing this mind mapping exercise with them so that you can generate a lot of ideas based on a lot of different people's lived experiences about how they feel living in their community. What are the main issues that come to mind, and what are the assets there that exist in the community to help residents and lift it up? And so after you do the community mind maps in partners, small groups, large groups, whatever, you're going to want to debrief a little bit. And so these are the two sort of overarching questions that we want you to consider. The first is, why is it important to ask residents how they feel about living in their communities? And so there'll be a lot of different answers, but what we really want you to come away with is the fact that, of course, residents are the folks who are supposed to be defining the problems in their communities, right? Advocates and politicians and people sort of looking in from the outside may have an idea about what's wrong with the community and may have an idea about what the solutions are, but if those are not informed by the people who are actually living in the community, there could be a very big sort of blind spot that's being missed. For example, in our organization, Citizens Committee for Children, we do a lot of research in communities. And one thing that we were seeing in the most recent sort of deep dive we did into a particular community in Queens, the data was showing that there's a large population of English language learners in this particular community in Queens. And so without doing any kind of project or initiative to get community input about how to increase English language proficiency, the city just dumped a whole bunch of money into creating English language classes in the evening for parents and community members who might want to go after work and take an English class. And after a few months of these classes being open in the community, they noticed that there were very few people taking advantage of them. And so we learned through our advocacy that the community was in danger of losing funding for those English language initiatives. So when we were out there in the community, we asked folks about this, and it turns out that it's not that they don't want the English language programs, and it's not that they don't want them in the evenings after work, because they would go. The problem is that there's no childcare at these English language classes, and so families were not able to go because they had young children to look after. And so if co-locating some sort of childcare situation while folks are taking these classes is the solution, you know, that's something that we have to know and be able to do to set ourselves up for success when bringing in programs to communities. So that's just one example, but there are a lot. You know, there's a very big warning sign when an outside expert thinks that they know what to do with a community without getting that community input.
For sure.
The next question.
Sorry, at Riley's Way, we like to say that we're not doing something for a community, but with a community. And so that's why we're really excited to start our this virtual series with a way to learn how to do something and learn from your communities.
Absolutely. And so this is a really good, like, just community project. A lot of people like the idea of surveys and whatnot, but surveys can be really impersonal. And so when you come in and you do this kind of like creative mapping exercise where people are comparing and sharing their experiences, you can almost get a little bit more of a dynamic understanding of what's going on. And so the next question is, what can this kind of map tell us that we might miss when looking at statistics? And so I think that previous example was a good one. But what it can also show us is that neighborhoods are not all about the numbers, right? And it's not even really about what are the programs there, how many schools are there. There are assets in communities and there are problems in communities that you can't get from numbers, right? You know, is there a building of seniors that is connected to a youth group who is going over there to spend some time with them once a week after school and just do recreation or you know, be a companion, right? That is a huge asset that is going to make a big difference in the lives of the seniors in that building, but that's not being captured anywhere, right? Are there sounds of music and smells of ethnic food like coming from restaurants and buildings around, and like what kind of atmosphere does that create in the community? You know, I think that there's a lot that gets missed when we don't think about culture and sounds and sights and smells and connections. And those are very real things that do actually matter in communities. So that is sort of the activity that we have to bring to you to start generating some of those community conversations. There are lots of different kinds of activities. We like this one, but you know, feel free to go online and look at how to run these kinds of creative focus groups, because there's a lot of resources out there.
Thank you. And I want to share quickly the one that I did. I hope it comes out. You can see it just quickly. While I was doing this activity, I realized how much there was that I didn't know about my neighborhood. And so I wish I had done it with someone sitting next to me who had been there for longer than I have, because they would know so much more. And so I'm really excited to learn how we can learn about getting into the data of what is in our communities, because a lot of my things were just guesses. And so having these tools that you're about to share will be really helpful.
Excellent. Good to know. And where do you live?
I live in Brooklyn. My neighborhood is Sunset Park, and I am a new resident. We moved in last summer, so I'm still getting to know it. I love it, but there's definitely things that are like, I think there's 2 schools like within the 10 block radius, but I don't actually know the answer to that. So this will be a really great way for me to learn much more about my neighborhood.
Excellent. Very good. All right, so now we're going to switch gears from personal community narratives to looking at different sets of data about communities. So we're going to show you 3 different online tools that we love, and just kind of very briefly talk to you about what you can find on them. It's really more important for you to kind of go on the websites and play with them yourselves, because everybody's interested in different demographics and there's just so much data. So we'll just take you through a few of the functionalities, but really encourage you to use these tools to your heart's desire and to really play around with them. So the Kids Count Data Center is a project of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and it tracks the well-being of children in the United States. So it provides high-quality data and trend analysis through its Kids Count Data Center, which I'll show you in a minute. And what it does is it seeks to enrich local, state, and national discussions concerning ways to secure better futures for all children, and also to educate folks on children's issues through a non-political, non-partisan, evidence-based lens. So we will switch our screen here to show you this Kids Count data tool. So here, there's a few different ways that you can start. You can either start by choosing a location. You start with states, and then you can go down to city if they have it. Or you can choose a topic or a characteristic. So these are all of the topics, and these are all of the characteristics. And I would say probably, the characteristics are the things that you want to be looking at if you're thinking about equity and disparity, and you want to see how immigration and race, ethnicity, and age play out in different issues. But for our purposes, I think the easiest way to use this tool is to start with choosing a topic. And so we'll just start with demographics, which is sort of your baseline. So how many people, how many men, how many women, how many children, but it also talks about like poverty level, income, employment. Those are also demographics. And so this will take you to the place where it has all the demographic indicators. Indicators is just a fancy way of saying like what type of statistic you're looking at. So child population by gender is an indicator, right? So let's go down and see child population by race. And then it will take you to a table where you can see, here's the United States, right? And here are all the race and ethnicities in the United States. And you can see in 2018, 25% of people in the United States were Hispanic or Latino. We'll go down to the next one that has a 50% are white and non-Hispanic. 14% are non-Hispanic Black. So those seem like the 3 highest categories here. That's national. That doesn't really tell you so much. We can look at this information by state. So you can look and you can see all the states here, starting with Alabama and alphabetically in this chart. Or you can just click, you can uncheck all and click the state that you want to look at. Sometimes this information is available on a map. Sometimes it's not. It will tell you, yes, this information is available on a map. And so you can hover over and see, I guess what are we looking? We're looking at, so this tells you what you're looking at. You're looking at non-Hispanic, American Indian, and Alaskan Native alone. I think you have to go over here to change which race you're looking at. Yeah, see down here on the side. So you'll have to look for one at a time. But it'll show you on this map what the percentages are. And so you can also go by city. Doesn't necessarily have all the cities, right? So it's not on the map, but you can go back to your table and see if you can get this information by city. Nope. So what is happening here is that there is not data on child population by race at the city level that the Kids Count Data Center was able to compile, right? And so there could be a lot of different reasons for that. And for different topics, you're gonna have differing availabilities for what you can see at the state and city level. So let's go back. One more thing on this before we move on to the next tool. I'm gonna try to think of something that will have citywide indicators. Let's look at poverty. I think we can find that in some cities. So here we are, poverty. Let's look at excuse me for 1 second. Here we go. Let's look at children in poverty. And you can see, I mean, it would take us forever to go through all of the indicators that you can find here. So again, definitely play around with it depending on what topics you're interested in. But here, let's see what we can get by city here, right? So if you look here, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of times it's the 25 most populous cities they will have the information for. And so if you live in one of these cities, this is very helpful for you. If you don't live in one of these cities, it's not super helpful, but you can go back and you can get the statewide numbers, right? So say you live in Atlanta, you can see the trend over time. Their highest was, it looks like in 2012, 39% of children were living in poverty, and now in the last year they had data available for, they're down to 31%. And so we do think that trend over time is an important factor to look at, so you can see if things are improving or getting worse. Laura, is there anything else you want me to show here that you think I'm missing?
I think that was really helpful and really well broken down for.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely play. You can look by location, by topic, by characteristic. And then we'll take you next to Measure of America. I'm just gonna stay on this page. Let me just toggle back to the. So Measure of America provides easy to use, methodologically sound tools for understanding the distribution of well-being and opportunity in America. So this is more generalized. It's not child specific. This focuses more on income and health outcomes and upward mobility. So here's the Mapping America tool. It just automatically populates by state as population. So you can look at any state you want. We're here in New York. And once you click on a state, it'll give you what is called a well-being index. And so you can go in and read what all of these indexes sort of mean here and what these numbers are broken down to on the sort of about pages and the understanding Measure of America pages. But over here is some pretty understandable and easy to break down demographics. So the life expectancy is in New York is 81 years, which according to this bar chart is sort of more higher than average. And then you have the educational attainment, which are the factors that make up this number of the education index. And then you have income, median income, which is the income index, right? You also have race and ethnicity broken down here. I'm sure if you compare different states, those with a higher level of people of color, just based on the history of sort of racial politics in our country, that you would see that there are some disparities in states that have higher populations of people of color. So that's just sort of the landing page, but then you can scroll down and you can look at other things as well. So again, you can look at states, metro areas, So those are cities. You can see what they have by county. So here you've got everything broken up by county. And again, it's doing population. Let's go to a bigger county. Oh, Arizona here. And then it'll give you the index for that particular county. If they don't have an indicator for that county, it will say. But this is a pretty good way of getting some information on a more granular level or a smaller geographic area. So let's pick a different indicator here to look at. Let's go to education and let's look at disconnected youth. I have a feeling that this is not going to be something that we can get I guess we can get it by, oh, all of this, yeah, all of this gray we don't have, right? But anything that's in color, you do have an indicator for. Again, I will go back to what I said before. If the data is not available in your municipality, meaning in your city, that is an advocacy sort of initiative in and of itself, is to get somebody to sponsor, like a legislator or an elected official, to commit to tracking what is happening in this area, right? So if you want to know how many youth are not in school or not in work and are not working, so that you can better create programs and services for that population, you need to have that information and you need to have that data. And so it's either your mayor or your governor or whomever is in charge of making the rules about tracking data and making it publicly available. You can always ask for that information. And if they're not keeping those records, you can advocate that there is a bill introduced to make them keep those records and then make them publicly available. So just to say, like, something interesting and different things that you can look at on Measure of America that you don't see on Count All Kids are things relating to the environment and health and inclusion and safety, right? So if you look at environment, you can look at things related to pollution and flooding, right? The reason that these are in light gray is because we have it by county, right now. So if we changed it over to by state, these might populate in a darker gray and allow us to, see. And you could also break it down by race, ethnicity, and gender. You also have some cool health indicators. So access to healthcare and insurance, health behaviors, right? Again, it depends on which places collect this information, but say you want to see smoking rates, right? Say that's something that you're interested in. And you want to look by ethnicity. So you want to see what are the rate of Asian folks who smoke. And you have that for, this is sort of where you can get that information. In most of the states you cannot, in some you can. If we just do everyone, all of the states do it. And not only can you kind of hover over and see what's going on in a given state, you can compare them over here on this track to the worst performing to the best performing. Oh, California, doing pretty good. Excuse me. So that is Mapping America. Again, the reason that we like these tools is because they're easy to use and pretty self-explanatory. Something that I also want to point out, and this was true for the previous one that I showed you too, if you hover over some of these other functionalities here, a lot of times you can find reports that look at the data, but also take into account some of that community stuff that we're talking about, and really sort of try to flesh out what's happening with the numbers. So if you're interested in learning more, I would say don't just use this mapping tool. Go to this home page and scroll through these things and see what other kinds of information you can get, because that sort of an organization that values data and research and social science is probably going to have some really good qualitative data out there that has more detail and more narrative around what you're looking for. So that was Measure of America. And finally, the last data tool that we're going to talk to you about is CCC's own data tool called Keeping Track Online. The limitation of this is that it is New York City specific. The strength of this is that if you do live in New York City, this is the most comprehensive database on child well-being indicators. We know in the entire country. We have been to some international symposiums too, where this is held up as a standard of how to collect data in a way that communities can use it for social action. And so this is a really robust tool to use for folks who live in New York City. So I'll very quickly go through the functionalities. The first thing that you can do is explore data, much like on the other tools. There's just a list here of all of the things that we track. So we can look at child poverty in New York City. It automatically populates on a map here, and you can see the communities with the highest child poverty concentrated in the South Bronx, and there's some in central Brooklyn, and then where there's yellow is the least amount of child poverty. You could break it down by race, ethnicity. So this is all, but then you can, over here, right, so the percentage of African Americans that are living in poverty versus percentage of Latinos living in poverty. And so those are just some more comparisons that you can make. We can look at, so right now, homelessness and housing is a big issue. So we can look at where there's overcrowded rental housing, which is a main driver of families going into homelessness. And again, you can see, you can just compare all 59 community districts to each other. So that's Explore data. Again, there's indicators related to just regular demographics, economic conditions such as income and the labor force, right? So these are just an exhaustive list of all of the indicators that we collect. Again, I know I'm going fast, so please feel free to play around with this on your own. There. The next thing that you could do is rank communities by risk. And so this is a really good tool when you're trying to compare communities to each other. So we'll start with economic security, right? Well, overall risk we have here, and this is shaded dark blue to light. Dark blue is the highest risk community, light blue is the lowest risk community. And we're talking about risks, we mean that there are multiple risk factors that are going to impact the outcomes that children have living in that community. So if there are multiple risks to child well-being that concentrate in one area, that will exponentially impact the outcomes of those kids. So everything from educational attainment and income later in life, it contributes to levels of civic engagement, contact with the justice system and the child welfare system. And of course, it needs to be said that just because a child is born into a certain community doesn't mean that they're automatically going to have terrible outcomes across all of these indicators. In fact, we do know that there are lots of assets in communities that help to alleviate and ameliorate some of those issues. It's just drawing attention to the disparities between communities so that we can sense when there's a problem happening that is systemic, that needs to be fixed by sort of the government and the systems that are responsible for keeping children and families safe. So if we look here at overall risk, I want to actually come up here because this will be more illuminating. So if we go over to economic security and we click on the highest risk community, let's look at a moderate too. Let's put a moderate risk community in there too. Let's do Sunset Park for Laura. All right. and then we'll put the lowest risk community. Okay, so what you can do after you've checked off all of the communities that you want to compare is scroll up, and you'll get this little detailed graph here. And so what it's doing is comparing and you can add as many communities to this as you want. The lowest risk, one that's kind of right in the middle, and the highest risk. Opposite, I said it the wrong way. Lowest, medium, highest. And then I did it again, whatever. It's kind of like. So what I really want to draw your attention to here is the vast disparity between highest and lowest, right? So the lowest risk neighborhood, Greenwich Village, has a child poverty rate of only 3.2, has a median income of $234,000 plus, and has an unemployment rate, a parental unemployment rate of 11.8%. If you compare that with Mott Haven, there's almost 60% of children living in child poverty, making almost $200,000 less than their counterparts in Greenwich Village, and have a 61 just about percent unemployment rate, right? Now, what I think is also really interesting is when you're looking at one right in the middle, Sunset Park, you'll see that it's actually closer to the higher risk communities. And what we see in New York City is that the greatest concentrations of wealth and income, much like we see in the rest of the country, are concentrated in like those top 5 or 6 community districts. And then everybody else is kind of falling behind. 37% unemployment is not nearly as dire as 60%. In the city, like, yes, maybe you can live on 50,000, you cannot live on 23,000. So there are, there's a difference between sort of like doable and livable, and then just like, I don't even understand what is going on with families that are at this level, because I don't know how you make ends meet, right? Another interesting thing is if we compare, I'm taking off this and I'm taking off this, and I'm putting in Sunset Park. It's not, you will see that it's not just a socioeconomic disparity. Oop, come on. It's also a racial disparity, right? So Mott Haven is predominantly Black and Latino, and Greenwich Village is overwhelmingly white, and Greenwich Village, well, there it is. So, these are just kind of interesting additional things that this tool can do to help you gain a more comprehensive picture of what's going on. So those are explored data and ranking community by risk. And then what we have here is mapping community resources, because of course, as we have been mentioning this whole time, it is not just about what's wrong with communities, it's about what's right with communities. And there's a lot that's right with communities, even communities that are low income communities and communities that we're always seeing at the highest risk end of the spectrum. I mean, there are amazing things going on within those communities. A lot of it you can't capture. Like we said before, it's culture, it's connections, it's people, but some of it you can capture. And so what we have here is a list of what we call assets, and we've broken them down in the same kind of way that we broke down the other indicators. So we can look at some things with economic security here. We can look at housing, like where are there housing developments and support services, homeless shelters. We can look at health facilities. And we can look at child care sites and schools where there's pre-K, right? We looked earlier at another tool, disconnected youth, right? If we're seeing that there's a high percentage of disconnected youth, we might want to know, well, in that community, like where are there youth services? So let's go and look at Mott Haven, and it looks like there's really not much there. And I guarantee you that Mott Haven probably has a very high level of youth disengagement. Let's see, where are we? Here, we're in the orange. And so right now, you're just seeing numbers which aren't helpful, but the closer you get, here we go, you'll see points on a map. Riverdale, where did we go? We need to go south.
Yeah, south.
Well, let's just look here. Souther, more southerly? Okay, here's my okay, so let's pick it up and bring it up here. Now you can see where all of these youth services are, right? It's not meant to be a directory, but you can figure out sort of what is here by the information that we have. So you can Google Eastside House Youth Services. It's an out of school time after school program, and you can Google this place, get the phone number, call, and ask about their services. And so you can see where they are, where they're kind of clustered right over here. And if you know the neighborhood, you know, you can kind of figure out where exactly geographically these places are. But it's interesting when you look at the assets, and you can come up here. I think you can overlay the risk in the assets, but that might be a little fancy footwork that I don't really know how to do. Right, yeah, so you can see here, I picked the youth indicator, and it's telling you which are the highest and lowest risk on youth, and then you can go in. But like, say you wanted to do housing, you wanted to see housing supports, you could come over and overlay it with the housing risk. And you can say, okay, these are the communities that are most at risk. Let's see if there are suitable, we'll unclick this one. Let's see if there are suitable, a suitable number of housing supports there. And again, all you have to do is zoom in on the areas that are darker blue, and kind of you can see what's going on. So that's that. I guess, Laura, do you have any questions or anything that you think I missed?
No, that's super helpful and really illuminating. As someone who lives in New York, this tool, I'm just thinking about all the different ways that I can use it and play around and get more information. I guess if someone is starting out with these tools, do you have a set of like the recommended indicators that they would start with to kind of get from the biggest picture down?
Yeah, so definitely I would start with like economic indicators. So looking at things like overall poverty rate. We're a Citizens Committee for Children. That's why a lot of this stuff is like heavy on children. But oftentimes you can also take what's happening to children and extrapolate that like that's what's happening in the community. But so you can just, yeah, basic demographics, income, employment. And then I think the next thing that a lot of folks look at is education. So what are the educational opportunities out there? How are different states faring in terms of education? If you're interested in sort of like young people and what's happening with youth, I think that's an area where there's a lot of advocacy that could be done to collect more information on things like juvenile arrests. And, you know, we're actually working on trying to compile indicators on what would determine whether a child is college ready. So not just are they graduating, not just like what are their test scores, but like, are they ready for college and career when they graduate? So there's a lot of stuff happening around education. Another thing that a lot of students are interested in is the school to prison pipeline. In New York City, we have to fight year after year to get information on like suspension rates by race, ethnicity, and by school. So that's something they can look for, and if they don't see, that's something that they can do like a public information request for to get that information. But I really would just encourage people, you know, data can be dry. So if you're interested in a topic, like look at the topic that you're interested in, because that's how you're going to get the most out of it. But again, I would say it's a really good idea to start by talking to folks in the community. Like, don't just look at the data first, like get an idea of what's going on the ground, what people are struggling with, what people need more of, and go from there.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I just have one more question, and this might be a bigger question than we're prepared to answer right now. And I know you have a lot of other trainings and workshops that you do that maybe answer this, but in a really brief synopsis, once someone has gone through and learned as much as they can about their community through talking to people and through these online tools, how can they take what they've learned and turn that into action?
There are so many different ways, and you're right, we do have an Advocacy 101 workshop. But I think the first thing that you can do is figure out, like, is this a problem that we can solve as a community, right? Is there something that we can do either to educate, like, right, is the problem that there's services out there that people don't know about and they're not accessing, which is a very different problem than if the services don't exist. If the services are out there and people aren't accessing them, that's an educational campaign. If the services don't exist, that's a political policy advocacy campaign where you're advocating for more funding for the services in the communities. And so those two things could look very different. So I would say, you know, to the extent that you can get involved in, like, in New York City, we have community boards, or if, you know, in other places, if there's like neighborhood councils, I feel like that's a really good place to start, because that's really going to be your entry point into, like, okay, what are the real community concerns here? And those people, though they are not elected officials, probably have better access to those people and better access to that information. You also want to do like some mapping around the local political landscape. Like, what is the structure of your city government or your state government, right? Everybody learns about the federal government in school. Nobody learns about city and state. And those are the places where you really have the most access to your legislators, but also those are the people who are making the laws and the policies that are most directly impacting your life on a day-to-day basis. Things at the federal level, while yes, you know, people are scared and things are happening that should rightly make people scared for different reasons, a lot of times those decisions take a long time to make, right? And like big changes to like law and the Constitution, I mean, those things take a lot of time, and may not directly impact us as much as the things that are happening at the state and local level. That's particularly true with states that have larger budgets and cities that have larger budgets that can cushion themselves from cuts that are coming from the federal level to things like housing and social services. I'll use New York State as an example again. You know, there are things that are happening at the federal level that are causing us to get less money for things like Medicaid, like insurance for low-income people, and that are sort of scary for our immigrant communities, but our governor and our mayor here in New York City are protecting the population from a lot of those things that are happening.
Well, that's great and a really great place to start once you have all of the information. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to you and to Isa too. Thank you for being here and for sharing your thoughts and your tools with us. And we really appreciate it. So
of course, anytime.